Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to The Parent Solution. I'm your host, Kimberly, and I have a guest here with me today who I'm pretty excited to introduce. Miriam, do you want to tell our listeners about yourself?
Sure. First of all, Kimberly, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to join this podcast where people are trying to think out of the box and creatively of how to help support our kids the best way. And I think that that work is so important. So thank you, Kimberly, for having this podcast and for having me as a guest on the podcast. First of
Happy to
all,
have you here.
thank you. So I started out in the schools in the traditional setting of as a speech therapist, and I would go do my sessions and, take my students out and get glares from my teachers for taking them out during those times. And then I started working as a social worker and had the same type of situation until I started realizing that my teachers were actually my best allies as far as actually getting the skills that I was doing in my one-on-one therapy sessions into helping the kids actually, integrate them, because otherwise they would stay with me in my little session, and the carryover, especially because my focus was always social emotional development, social skills, the language, social language, problem solving, emotional regulation, all those, very integral skills. It wasn't very helpful for them to be able to succeed inside of the therapy room if they weren't succeeding in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that the dynamic was very much where I was taking the student out of the classroom, and understandably, that's very disruptive to a class. And instead of providing a resource to the teachers, it ended up being like a drain for the teachers. And I would have parents say like, well, should I take my child out? Like, they're missing other classes and other things. And I started really recognizing that the change had to happen and the work had to happen within the classroom dynamic and within the home dynamic in order for anything that I was doing one-on-one to be effective. So that was sort of what brought me to Skills for Connection and helping, helping the classroom and the parents be able to actually do the same things I was doing in my one-to-one therapy sessions and do them throughout the day. So that way the math lesson can be a lesson on emotional regulation, and a lesson on, focusing, and a lesson on expressing your emotions, very often a frustration for many of our students, and help our teachers have the capacity to and the tools to know what to do when their student has a meltdown, because the math is so hard. And then instead of the meltdown being a problem behavior that they now had to deal with in their very tough day, it became part of the lesson. It became part of the curriculum. And so the challenges that the kids were dealing with and the teachers were dealing with, and that were causing a lot of burnout, with this paradigm shift of seeing it as part of the learning experience and part of what we teach them, it changed, it flipped it all on its head. And we've been seeing like amazing results with teachers and with parents and how they are seeing behaviors at home. And it's really helping the kids. So those one-to-one sessions can be like, are still supportive, but are supportive within a framework where they're getting these skills reinforced throughout the day. So that's what I do in a
A
nutshell.
little bit, a little bit
Is that
about you. No, thank you for sharing. I think that that's really cool. I think it's very admirable that you are doing such a thing and that you're trying to integrate it into a more holistic sort of framework. Anyone who's listened to previous episodes of this knows that I'm all about holistic education, and I'm all about trying to integrate things into one sort of framework and one sort of approach, rather than trying to treat things separately, right? For example, when you treat the body, just as a general rule, when you treat the body for something, you want to look at the whole body as a whole. When you look at a framework of education, you want to look at the whole framework as a whole and try to come up with ways that you can integrate things that are helpful for everybody in different categories. So can you tell me a little bit about what this sort of solution look like? Like, do you have your own school? Do you have your own program? What does that look like?
so I have different tools for different things. But the main thing that I do now is I have parent cohorts, I have teacher cohorts, I have therapist cohorts where I teach them constructs, language, cognitive, emotional constructs, which sort of create a lens or like a stamp for them to be able to process life events. So it's a very generic type of like a structure for
Hmm.
them to that's dynamic because it's so simple, but it allows us to support skills. Like, for example, the concept of self and other. So
Hmm.
there's one side and there's another side, which is like a prerequisite skill for perspective taking, empathy, persuasion, conflict resolution, all the things that we're trying to, that there's such a push for nowadays of helping people understand where other people are coming from. And so teaching that framework within a language arts lesson where the construct, the visual construct that I teach as about one and the other, and understanding both independently, and then being able to eventually be able to, through a different construct, maybe a problem solving construct, uh, how to have conflict resolution, or even if there is no conflict resolution, the value of being able to understand the other and being able to understand the self and value the self. So this like comes into play in they could be reading Huck Finn, or they could be reading the Magic School Bus, or they could be reading and what's Arnold's perspective, what's Miss Frizz's perspective, what's in any book. It doesn't have it doesn't have it's not age it's not age specific, because it's really, these are values and concepts and constructs that are at the core of all these skills. So I've used these same constructs with married folk, honestly, and high schoolers as I have with preschoolers, because the underlying core concept is the same. So I have these worksheets. They're all on Teachers Pay Teachers, but how to use the worksheets, like to understand them really, people usually take a course and then they can understand how to integrate it. So then if people still have, follow-up questions, like how do I do it with this class when they're struggling with bullying? How do I do it with this class they're struggling with cliques? How do
Hmm.
I do it with this student who, is not understanding why their behavior is causing the other kids to pull away or to feel sort of nervous around them, or all the different things that we deal with when we're dealing with life and interaction with other human beings.
Hmm.
um, so that's like what a construct, one of the constructs that I would teach would be like a self and other construct that helps you can use through and utilize through all the other lessons throughout the
Hmm.
day.
Very cool. So it's like a holistic sort of framework that you teach to teachers and ideally to parents as well. That does help, should it be put into practice, that does help with this development of these social emotional skills that we're missing in today's day and age.
Yes, very, very much. And I find that very often I'll be working with a parent. I do parent coaching also, and I'll be teaching them how to use the skill with their child, and how to help the child be able to understand, like when their sibling is banging down the door and wants to have a turn in the bathroom, what is happening. So you are trying to use the bathroom and they feel like it's too long, and just even like basic things. And very often, like through that work, parents will start recognizing that it's work that they also need to do with themselves. Like, oh, I think
Mhm.
it's bedtime, and it is bedtime because the child needs to sleep. They think it's time to finish their puzzle. Like even just
Right.
the same tools that we're teaching, because it's universal and because we're getting to the core of these skills, um, which is what I really believe is what helps generalization, and it helps it not be something that's theoretical, because the parents are immediately integrating it with their life. It's not like a abstract idea of like, okay, so Arnold and Miss Frizz are having that challenge, and okay, so that's just a theoretical concept. That's how you learn the idea, but you're using it throughout the day. You guys want to walk out to recess and you're so excited. We have to be quiet because we have to think about the other classes because they're thinking we're in the middle of a test. Like understanding self we're excited. The other, they're in the middle of a test. Self, I need to go, I want to stay in the bathroom and blow dry my hair for another hour. Other, they want to take a shower to be able to get ready for bed. Self, I think that it's bedtime. Other, they want us to continue their puzzle. Just like the same core idea, and how to integrate that throughout, life, because that's what it's all about. Countries will be much better off when
Yes,
they could do this skill, and governments and, families and friends and spouses and everybody. We all can benefit from it. We
yes,
all can grow in it.
I do think, I think this is an awesome sort of solution. I think it's definitely much needed for yeah, like you say, countries, but yes, just people in general. Because I think that there's a lot of skills that are sort of missing. I like how you focus on the idea of the self versus the other, and the importance of perspective. And even I find as adults, sometimes we need a reminder that it's not always about just our perspective, but other people's too, and where they're coming from. They're not necessarily coming from something with the same mindset that you are, or with the same perspective that you are. So trying to step outside of yourself and genuinely actually comprehend where someone else is coming from and what they're thinking. I think one of the best ways to do that is through communication. And here we go on another core skill that's really lacking in today's society. But I think that's a topic best left for another podcast.
Well, this really is how you teach that. This is, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm a speech therapist. I started off as a speech therapist, which is when I was teaching about communication and connection through how to connect through communication. But without this skill, then there's nothing to communicate. So this is like all this construct skills lead. They build off of each other,
Mhm.
and they develop skills for communication, like how to have a persuasive argument. If you want to try and convince your mom that you can stay up late, you have to understand what mom's concern is. She doesn't want to have a hard morning of trying to get you out of bed. So if you can communicate, if you understand mom's perspective, you'll have a much better job for,
Persuading her
persuading
to let
her
you
to
stay
let
up.
you
Yeah.
stay up.
Yeah.
So that's something that, like, these are all skills that are all very, very functional. So it's a matter of us practicing them and practicing, using them throughout the day. And there isn't, so there's a lot of programs, there's a lot of social emotional programs that have, like, very clear, first show this video, then you say this sentence, then give them this writing prompt, then they do this writing exercise,
Mhm.
which I think is lots of creativity, and there's a lot of wonderful, wonderful heart there. But the idea is that we don't want it to remain in the mind. We want it to be something that they're actually using throughout the day. So where a program like this will give them a worksheet and trust the teachers and entrust the parents, you know, this is yours to carry. You could decide if you use this during carpool line. You could decide if you use this during lunchtime, but you have to really take ownership of it to be able to integrate it. No one's going to tell you, like, oh, this is the moment that you should, you have to really be able to understand the skills, which means you have to really be practicing them. So it's a internally change. It's not like one of these, you know, glitzy, glamorous type of things. It's real change. It's real
Mhm.
integration. It's real, development, and, paradigm shifting. And it's a real process. It's a beautiful,
Mhm.
real process.
Right. I love that you mentioned that you put the ownership and the responsibility, and the accountability on the person themselves, because that is a big thing, in terms of, I think, teaching social emotional skills is teaching that idea of personal responsibility and accountability. So I absolutely love that you've created something, that seems to be, a rather holistic and rather, realistic solution for a lot of people. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your sharing of this information.
My pleasure. And if people want to be able to access, I have a social emotional regulation
Yes,
series
please.
that is free right now on Instagram. You could go to skills for the number 4 connection, and you can follow through and learn about emotional regulation. And you can learn I have a book, Bubble Double, that's also on Amazon, that teaches about the skills through using visualization and all these different tools that I really try and give to parents, give to teachers. And if you need further support, you could always find me, Miriam at skillsforconnection.com. And I'm happy to be able to support and show you how to do it. Or if you look for your school, you would want training for your school or your parent group or whatever it is, I got your back.
Awesome. That's awesome. No, I'm all about creating a community of people that can help others and particularly parents. That's why this is the Parent Solution. Thank you so much, Miriam. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks for having me.
That is all for this episode of The Parent Solution. Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in to this episode. If you have any comments or questions, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll be back next week with more insightful solutions for you. Next week's podcast is titled The Empathy Chip, and I'm looking forward to sharing it.